Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to summarize Frankenstein, the 1818 text by Mary W. Shelley, chapters 13 to 24. Chapter 13, Victor travels to England with his friend Henry Clerval, hoping to escape his troubles. He is initially happy and carefree, but his peace is short-lived. Victor receives a letter from his father, informing him of the murder of his younger brother, William. Victor is consumed by guilt and fear, convinced that the monster is responsible for the murder. Chapter 14, Victor returns to Geneva and is reunited with his family. He is determined to find the monster and make him pay for his crimes. Victor becomes increasingly obsessed with his quest for revenge, neglecting his family and his health. He becomes increasingly paranoid and fearful, convinced that the monster is watching him. Chapter 15, Victor tracks the monster to a remote mountainous region. He confronts the monster and they have a long and heated conversation. The monster tells Victor about his life since his creation and how he has been rejected and mistreated by society. He also speaks of his desire for companionship and his request for a mate. Victor becomes increasingly sympathetic to the monster's plight but eventually refuses his request for a mate, fearing the consequences. Chapter 16, the monster becomes increasingly angry and vengeful after Victor refuses his request for a mate. He warns Victor that he will make him suffer and disappears into the night. Victor becomes increasingly paranoid and fearful, convinced that the monster is watching him. Chapter 17, Victor returns home to Geneva and prepares to marry Elizabeth. He is initially happy and carefree, but his happiness is short-lived. On the night of his wedding, the monster appears and kills Elizabeth. Victor is devastated by her death and vows to seek revenge on the monster. Chapter 18, Victor becomes increasingly obsessed with his quest for revenge. He spends months tracking the monster, neglecting his own health and well-being. He becomes increasingly paranoid and fearful, convinced that the monster is always one step ahead of him. Chapter 19, Victor becomes increasingly ill and is eventually rescued by a family living in the mountains. He spends months recovering, and during this time he tells the family his story, including his creation of the monster. The family is initially sympathetic but becomes fearful and disgusted by Victor's actions. Victor eventually recovers and continues his pursuit of the monster. Chapter 20, Victor tracks the monster to a remote area of the Arctic and is rescued by a group of explorers. He recounts his story to the captain of the ship and begs him to help him track down the monster. The captain agrees, and they set out on a perilous journey across the Arctic in pursuit of the monster. Chapter 21, Victor and the captain of the ship continue their journey in pursuit of the monster. They encounter treacherous weather and dangerous conditions, but they persist in their quest. Victor becomes increasingly weak and sick, and he eventually dies on board the ship. Chapter 22, the captain of the ship continues his pursuit of the monster, but he eventually loses sight of him in the treacherous Arctic landscape. The captain reflects on Victor's story and the tragedy of his life. He becomes increasingly haunted by the events of the past and the knowledge of what Victor created. Chapter 23, the monster appears to the captain and tells him about his life since he last saw Victor. He speaks of his regret and remorse for the murders he committed and his desire to find peace. The monster eventually disappears into the Arctic landscape, leaving the captain to ponder the tragedy of his story. Chapter 24. The novel ends with Walton, the captain of the ship, reflecting on the events of the past and the tragedy of Victor's life. He reflects on the dangers of ambition and the consequences of unchecked scientific progress. The novel ends with the captain expressing his regret for not being able to help Victor and his hope that others can learn from his story. The final chapter of the novel continues with the narrative of Walton writing to his sister. He expresses his disappointment at having lost his new friend Victor, but is grateful for the insight into the consequences of unrestrained ambition that Victor's story provided him. Walton acknowledges that he was once similarly driven by a passion for exploration and discovery, but after hearing Victor's story, he has learned the dangers of such unchecked ambition. Walton goes on to recount a dream he had about Victor, in which the deceased scientist appeared to him and warned him of the dangers of his pursuit. In the dream, Victor spoke of the happiness he had once known before his ambition took hold of him, and urged Walton to appreciate the joys of life and to pursue knowledge and ambition in moderation. Walton concludes his letter to his sister, expressing his desire to return home, and noting the irony of his situation. He had once set out on a dangerous journey to fulfill his own ambitions, but after hearing Victor's story, has been changed by it and now seeks to live a life of moderation. Thus, the novel ends with a warning against the dangers of unchecked ambition, and a plea for balance and moderation in the pursuit of knowledge and discovery. Overall summary: Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences of scientific progress without ethical considerations. The novel follows the life of Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant scientist who becomes obsessed with creating life. Through his reckless pursuit of knowledge, he brings to life a monster that ultimately leads to his downfall. The novel is divided into 3 parts, with each part exploring a different stage in Victor's life. Part 1 follows Victor's childhood and his fascination with science. It also introduces the concept of the monster and the initial stages of Victor's creation. Part 2 focuses on Victor's creation of the monster and the monster's journey through the world. It also explores the theme of nature versus nurture and the idea of the monster as a product of his environment. Part 3 follows Victor's pursuit of the monster and their final confrontation in the Arctic. Throughout the novel, Shelley explores the themes of ambition, knowledge, responsibility, and the power of nature. She also critiques the scientific advancements of her time, suggesting that without proper ethical considerations, progress can lead to destruction. The novel is also a commentary on societal issues, such as the treatment of women and marginalized groups, and the dangers of prejudice and fear. In conclusion, Frankenstein is a masterpiece of Gothic literature that explores the dark side of human ambition and the dangers of scientific progress. The novel's enduring legacy lies in its critique of society's obsession with progress and its call for ethical considerations in scientific discovery. Thanks for watching. To read the full version of the book, click on the link in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for similar content.